Joining us now to discuss more of this is the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. Secretary, thanks for being with us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so talk to us about this decision to ease restrictions on fully vaccinated travelers. To be clear, this is folks coming over the border crossings, the land borders from Mexico and Canada. How did the administration make this decision, and why now?
Well, it's always been guided by safety and public health, and it's important news for our country, for our economy. We're talking about land ports of entry with two of our key trading partners. It helps to safely open up North America, and it's going to be important for the supply chains that we're here to talk about at the White House today, as well as for Americans on so many different fronts. Meanwhile, of course, we've had the announcement about international air travel and working to make it possible for that to open in new ways, again, for vaccinated travelers. Throughout, this has been guided by the needs for public health and public safety. Of course, we want to get to that fully reopened state as quickly as we responsibly can, but it's always first going to be guided by doing what's right to beat this pandemic.
So holiday expectations management, as we're looking at these supply chain issues, how bad are they going to get for Americans? And I'm talking specifically, leading here into the December holidays where people are relying on getting goods, on getting presents.
Well, I think there's always been two kinds of Christmas shoppers. There's the ones who have all their list completed by Halloween, and then there's people like me who show up at the mall on Christmas Eve. If you're in that latter bucket, obviously there's going to be more challenges, but we are also working right now with the private sector players who own and operate most of U.S. supply chains to find ways to ease the bottlenecks that are impacting everything from consumer goods to construction goods in this country. This is a largely private sector system and a global one at that, but there are a lot of steps that we can take as an administration, as an honest broker. That's what the president has directed us to do, and that's part of why we're gathering right here at the White House with leaders from the ports of LA and Long Beach, labor leaders, and the private sector companies that, the FedExes, UPSs, Walmarts, others who play that role on everything that happens between when something arrives on a ship and when it gets to the shelf so that you can get it to your home.
So you're doing this 90-day sprint. This is what the administration is doing to address these supply chain issues. But when you do the math on that, of course, that takes us into January. So that is after, of course, December, after the holidays. Should Americans be prepared? Should they know they're not going to get their packages, they're not going to get their goods in time for Christmas if they're not doing it right now?
Well, let me be clear. There is more throughput than there has ever been. In other words, we are processing right now as a country record levels of containers and other goods coming into our ports already. The issue is that there's even more demand than the supply chain can support. Remember, we are relying on supply chains that were built generations ago. It's one of the reasons why this entire year we have been talking about and working on infrastructure and are eager to see Congress act to get this infrastructure deal through. It includes $17 billion for our ports, which is a level of support, federal support for ports that we've never seen before. Of course, that's a long-term concern. There are short-term steps that we can take too, like expanding the hours at our biggest ports and working with terminal operators, with truckers to get that flow of goods. Think about it. When you see these pictures of those ships waiting at anchor, waiting outside of the ports, that means the ships are already there. So it's everything after that that we have to work to unclog. There not being spaces for the ships at the berths. It's the containers being backed up. And that goes through our supply chain, through the rails, through the trucks, again, all the way to the store shelf.
Yeah, the ripple effects are wide, and we're learning they're very expensive as well. I do want to ask you about the agenda item, of course, of the social safety net bill, the infrastructure bill. But first, I want to ask you about Southwest, because we saw these disruptions here in recent days. And I just wonder, how concerning is it to you that the cascading effect of just, a few hours of weather and air traffic issues caused this many cancellations?
Well, this is another example of a resilience issue. We've seen how the supply chains have not always been nimble enough to keep up with the movement of goods. And we're finding that in this case, you have an airline that did not have the right planes and people in the right places when there was this impact, mainly from weather issues that took place in Florida. Now, that in this case impacted that one airline, but we continue to want to see steps taken to make it possible. Often the limiting factor has to do with labor as well as equipment, and we need to make sure that we have a more nimble and flexible set of capabilities. And that feeds back to our broader systems, which again, I know I keep repeating it, but it's why we've got to invest in our infrastructure as a country.
On this critical time for getting the Biden agenda through Congress, and I know you've been very outspoken when it comes to the needs of the country, climate, for instance, as well as other topics, but you have the Speaker warning her caucus that difficult decisions have to be made. What would your message be to progressives? Do they need to budge?
Well, remember that this vision, any way you cut it, is an enormous step forward for America. Obviously, for the infrastructure issues that I work on every day, and for families, whether we're talking about health care, child care, climate change, there is going to have to be a series of adjustments. That's how a negotiation works, but we are still on track to deliver something that will be remembered for decades, for the rest of my lifetime, as a game changer for American families. As a new parent, obviously, I'm thinking about some of those child care and other issues with a whole new level of urgency. But the American people already see the need to do this. I think most members of Congress do too. I know the Democratic caucus shares that vision and that sense of urgency. We've just got to get it done.
You've got to get it done, but it's not going to get done unless someone budges. Do progressives need to budge?
Look, everybody is going to have to take a look at where they started and where they want to get to, and that's exactly the process that's underway. By their very nature, negotiations end in a different place than where all of the parties came in. But I believe the place that we can end at, the place that we can get to, is going to represent a stronger economy and a better life for this country. It's what the president has been talking about from the beginning of this administration, from before the beginning of this administration. The idea that we're not just building back to 2019, we're building back better, whether we're talking about physical infrastructure or whether we're just talking about making it easier to raise a child, to get through life, to participate in the economy in this country. Progressives believe in that, moderates believe in that, the president believes in that, and we're going to get it done.
All right. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, thank you so much, and congratulations to you and your husband.
Thanks.